Thank you, Clifford. It's an honor to be involved in this project. I think it's a great project. Let me get my screen up. There I am. Okay. Yeah, as I say, I'm delighted to be your first speaker. I think this is a really, really important initiative. And I think it's very important. It's actually very appropriate that you've asked me to speak as a futurist. But COVID is going to come and COVID is going to go. And we have to start thinking about what comes beyond that. One of the biggest problems we face in the world, in business, in society, in politics, is short-termism. Is this idea of only thinking for the next month or the next 6 months. We actually need to develop a 10-year module, a forward-thinking module, and that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I've called this presentation Facing the Perfect Storm. Right now, we're facing a perfect storm of COVID, but we're facing a perfect storm of change and have been facing a perfect storm of change for many, many years. So that's what I really want to touch on. Now, I want to stress to you that I'm not an educationalist. As Clifford said, I'm actually a journalist by background and an entrepreneur. I got involved in media and a variety of things. But right now, I spend my time working around the world, or I used to spend my time on aeroplanes. I used to fly probably 6 months of the year. And I do desperately look forward to hearing those magic words as I walk down the aisle. This is your captain speaking. I haven't been able to hear that for some months, and neither have you. So what we do is we actually help executive leaders in business, in politics, in government, all around the world, try to understand what are the big trends, what are the things shaping the future. I teach at Oxford University, at the Said Business School, London Business School, Stockholm School of Economics, Indian School of Business, and do corporate education. The other thing we do that's quite a lot of fun, every week we publish something called a mind bullet on the internet. And it comes out just as an email, and this is a newsletter written in the future. So it might be dated 2028. And the idea is just to say to our readers, we have about 25,000 readers around the world, think about this scenario. This is not a projection. It's simply a scenario of what we think might happen. I invite you all to subscribe to them. They are perfectly free. All you do is you go to the futureworld.org website. You'll see the Mind Bullet link at the bottom of the page. Click on it and register. And every week you will get this free newsletter from the future. And the idea is to make you think a little bit about what the world might look like. My own background, as you heard, was journalism. I literally grew up in a newsroom working like this, hammering away with 2 fingers on a manual typewriter. I still type at about 70 words a minute, which means I have to replace the keyboard at least 6 or 7 times, at least every 6 months or so, because I hammer away at that keyboard. And in fact, there's a photograph of me, angry young man, setting out to change the world, as we all were. We were all going to change the world as young people. And I eventually became news editor of a group of newspapers, very powerful position. My job was to take all of the news every day and throw away 95% of it. I had to decide what I thought my readers had to know. Wonderfully powerful position, until, of course, along came the internet. And suddenly everything changed. And we all know what's happened to newspaper circulations around the world. But the point is, this is not about newspapers. This is a perfect example of what is happening to every single industry, including education. Everybody still needs education, but the means by which education is delivered is completely changing. The people who previously controlled the flow is changing. The content producers are changing, just as it has in news, just as it has in music and many other industries. So really, this is a wonderful analogy of what's happening in the world. The old players are being overtaken by new rules, new players coming into the market. So what do we do as futurists? We try to understand what I call the waves of change. What are the things that right now might just be ripples out on the horizon? But over the next 5, 10 years, they're going to grow into these tsunamis, these giant waves that smash down on us and change the way we think and change the way we operate. So we talk about the impacts on society. We talk about the impacts on government. We talk about how technology, of course, is the big driver of change, is impacting the world. We talk about business. And critically, we also talk about humanity. And very often, there isn't enough time to talk about that. What are the implications of all of these changes on us as human beings? And for you as educators, that is such a fundamental point. How do you make sure that the young people whose minds you are molding are going to be fit citizens in a world that is not going to be the same as the one in which we grew up in And indeed, in 5 or 10 years' time, won't be the same as the world that they're growing up in. So this is a presentation we built recently. I'm not going to do this one. This is the one that I shared with Clifford. And we called this one Control, Alt, Delete, because that's a perfect example of what COVID has done to us. It's made us stop and say, hang on, we have to reconsider how we work, how we live. We have to reconsider. Yep, just move that out the way. There we go. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about now today. It's fundamental. This presentation is not about the future of schools or the future of education or the future of teaching. And if I was talking to a cell phone company, I would say this is not about the future of mobility or whatever else. The point is we are going through what I call a fundamental reboot of the global operating system. And it's not just COVID. Long before COVID, the whole fundamental, the way the world works, has been going through a change. And if we're going to understand that, we need to understand a critical word. We need to understand the word context. What is the social, geopolitical, technological, business context? In other words, what's the big picture of the world? It's no point in saying, let's try and understand how education is changing, unless we understand education in the context of what else is happening around the world. So this is a wonderful quote from Alvin Toffler, who was one of the early futurists. Back in the 60s, Alvin Toffler said this, that the losers of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's a dreadful reality. We've all filled our heads with knowledge. We've been to school, we've been to college, we've been to universities. We've filled our heads with knowledge. But much of that knowledge is simply not going to be applicable in the future that lies ahead. And we're going to have to take some of it out to make space for new things. Because the bottom line is this one, and I just love this picture. It is such a powerful image. We're living in what I call an exponential world. And what is exponential? It's this concept that change gets faster and faster and faster. There we are in 2020 right now. And we've all lived through massive change in our lives already. We've all seen the world change dramatically. Forget the last 4 months. Just think about the political changes in South Africa and the world. Think about what's happening right now in the world with the United States and China at each other's throats, all sorts of things happening around the world. But I want to say to you with absolute certainty, we will encounter more change in the next 20 years than we have in the last 100 years. So put on your seatbelts, because there's a wild, wild ride ahead. And it's explained by this concept of exponential growth versus linear growth. And here's a simple way to understand it. If I was to take 30 linear steps across the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, after 30 steps, surprise, surprise, I would have gone 30 steps. If I take 30 exponential steps, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, in other words, doubling up with each step, after 30 steps, this might come as a shock to you, I would have gone 26 times around the planet. And that's what's happening in the world right now. The change that's happening is not linear. It is exponential. It's doubling up at a speed that we've never, ever seen before. And this is a graph that explains it. This comes from Peter Diamandis in a book called AbundanceHub.com. And you think about it, we could easily take the COVID infection graph and overlay it like this. The COVID infection rate is a perfect example of exponential growth. It's not happening slowly. It's increasing all the time. And this is probably the best explanation of exponential growth that I've ever come across. When anything becomes digitized, and education, of course, being an information technology, is already becoming digitized. When anything becomes digitized, a couple of things happen. The first, the change is deceptive. And I'm always reminded, in my journalism days, I interviewed the then head of Telkom when cell phones launched in South Africa. I'll never forget, he said to me with absolute certainty, there is a marketplace for 1 million cell phones in South Africa. Only rich people will ever be able to afford them. Today, we have about 120 million active SIM contracts in the country. So that's a perfect example of deceptive change. But very rapidly, as you go up that curve, that change becomes disruptive. Why does it become disruptive? Because a couple of things happen. First of all, things that previously cost money become demonetized. In other words, they become free. Just think about photography. If you've got gray hair like me, you will remember that photography used to be an expensive hobby. You would have to take pictures. You would very carefully take your 24 or 36 pictures. Then you had to take the film to the chemist to get processed. It was really expensive and slow. Now we take billions and billions of pictures every day because every one of us has a camera in our smartphone. So photography has become completely demonetized. The next thing that happens is that physical things become dematerialized. How do you dematerialize a taxi? Well, you turn it into an app called Uber. If I want a taxi, I don't have to go and look for one. I simply tap a button on my cell phone, and 3 minutes later, a car pulls up outside my front door. We've taken what was a physical process and we've turned it into a digital process. And the final thing that happens is democratization. And this is really the most important point and hugely important for education. It means that your reach, your customer base, if you like, effectively becomes infinite. You can reach out across the world. You can share information across the world as we're doing right now. You can gather learning material from anywhere in the world, and your marketplace at very little cost becomes effectively infinite. And this is what's happening in business. And in fact, if you think about education, this is what's happening too. And what Clifford and his colleagues have launched with this initiative is exactly this. We're trying to disrupt education. We're trying to demonetize it, dematerialize it, and democratize it. This is exactly what's happening. And of course, if you don't respond to this change, then you go the other way. Your business or your enterprise fails and will actually eventually go out of business. Just to illustrate the power of this concept, you've all heard of Airbnb, I think, this idea that if you have a room or a spare apartment, you can rent it out to other people through Airbnb, and they take a little slice of the fee. So this is a picture of Paris in France. The blue dots are hotels. The red dots are Airbnb premises. And that shows just how quickly, how this exponential curve, how this thing called Airbnb has become the biggest player in the leisure market, in the entertainment, or rather the hospitality market. And this is what the head of Airbnb had to say. Marriott, you know Marriott, the big hotel chain, the big hotel group? He said, Marriott wants to add 30,000 rooms this year. We will add that in the next 2 weeks. What does it cost Marriott to add 30,000 rooms? Millions and millions of dollars. What does it cost Airbnb to add 30,000 rooms? Zero. That is what exponential growth is all about. It's called platform economics, and that's what this whole concept of digitization has done to the marketplace. And the important point for you as educators is that this is the world that the children that you're serving are growing up in. Our children are growing up in the world of instant gratification. I want it now. I don't want to wait for it. I want you, in fact, to know what I want before I want it. This is what things like artificial intelligence will do for us in the future. So I want to just touch on, these are the things that we're talking to business leaders and to government leaders around the world. Everybody's talking about this thing called the fourth industrial revolution. What is it really? Well, I think this is a great definition. It's the fusion, the coming together of the physical world, the digital world, and the biological world. For example, we're starting to use DNA to store information. We're starting to use DNA and biological processes to do all sorts of things in business and industry. And I think there are 6 major technologies that are going to reshape the future. The first one, obviously, we all talk about it, is artificial intelligence. Now, we tend to be frightened of artificial intelligence, yet we all use it. When you pick up Siri on your cell phone and say, hey, Siri, do this or do that, that's a very simple application of artificial intelligence. The big question is, will we ever move to what they call super AI, which will be an intelligence that is significantly hundreds, millions of times more intelligent than a human being? Big, huge research going into this, but AI is present in our businesses right now. It's being used significantly in education around the world. Along with that is something called quantum computing. This is in the beginning stages. The first quantum computers have been built in test phase. This is going to enable computing to multiply its ability and its speed by millions of times. The best way I can think of to describe this, imagine if you were in a library with 5 million books. And I said to you, in one of these books, there's a particular word. I want you to find it. You've got 5 minutes, go. Impossible, you couldn't do it. If you were a quantum computer, you would break yourself into 5 million U's, and each one of you would then go through that book at supersonic speed, and you would find that word in a microsecond. Quantum computing will probably become commercial within the next 5 years. It's going to completely and utterly change the entire world of computing. Along with that is something called blockchain technology, which is going to reinvent the way transactions operate. Blockchains remove the need for a third party. Theoretically, you wouldn't need a bank. You'd be able to exchange value directly between players. Again, it's young technology, but I believe it's going to have a huge impact. Cyber currencies, Bitcoin, which sits on blockchain. Cyber currencies are going to become very big in the future. Money is a dirty thing. Physical money is dirty. Physical money is clumsy. It's inefficient. We are moving increasingly towards digital money. And then finally, of course, the concept of robotics. This is going to change many, many things. Now, there's a human impact to this. Undoubtedly, we are going to see many, many, many jobs changed and simply destroyed by this technological revolution. It's called technological unemployment, probably the biggest single social issue facing the world today. One of the things you have to work with the young people whose minds you're working with is to make sure that they are equipped to thrive in a world that's going to be different, a world that is going to require completely different skills. We're going to, for example, see the health, longevity, and wellness market soaring in value. And already you're seeing Apple and Google and companies like that getting involved. We're going to see local supply chains. COVID has challenged supply chains, challenged the idea that we can access things from anywhere around the world at any point. We're going to see local businesses growing more strongly, great opportunities for us here in South Africa. And the environmental issues are coming to the fore. The so-called circular economy, the idea that we can factor waste out of the economy, that we can reuse things, is going to become a critical factor going forward. And we should be educating all of our young people about the importance of the environment. So basically what I'm saying to you is that we had better get used to living in a world where machines are going to be able to do things better than we as human beings can. I want to give you an example. Watch this little video. Watch the red car in the video. Listen for the beep. Nasty stuff, huh? Did you all hear the beep? Thumbs up if you heard the beep. What you saw there was a video taken from the dashboard camera of a Tesla motor car in self-drive mode, a self-driving car. And that computer system driving that car saw a full second before the accident happened that the car, the red car, wasn't going to pass the other one. So the beeping that you heard before the accident had even happened, that computer system was putting the brakes on in the Tesla and pulling off the road to avoid the accident. That's the kind of thing that computer systems and artificial intelligence are going to do for us in the future. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever had the privilege of driving in a self-driving car. I've done it a few times. It's the most amazing experience. And I thought I would just share the experience with you. Have a quick look at this.
Okay, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not touching it. No, the car's watching. It sees, oh my gosh, the car knows exactly where the person ahead of me is in the lane. Because I could see it here on the dash. And, oh, red light.
I'll stop it there. But for me, the interesting part, self-driving cars are coming. Believe you me, it might take a bit longer in South Africa. I can't quite imagine how our taxis are going to cope with self-driving cars. But electrical cars and self-driving cars are becoming a reality. And of course, it's impacting everything. And the important lesson from this, there's two important lessons that flow out of that video. The first is to watch the human reaction. That guy was deeply uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do with his hands. Why? Because we have been taught from the time that we were tiny that we must have our hands on the wheel of life. We must be in control. But in this digital world, we're being told, let go. There are things that the machines will do better than us. And this is something you're going to have to explore with your young pupils. How do they cope with a world where we have to let go and not be in control? The second important lesson from this is that while it's obviously impacting the auto industry, the motor car industry, when a change happens like self-driving electric cars, the impact flows out. Just think about who else is going to be infected. Think about the service stations. Think about petrol stations. Think about the panel beaters. Think about the repair companies. Think about insurance. Think about traffic police. All of these other sectors are going to be impacted. And that's a really important point for us to understand. This exponential curve that we're going through is not just changing one or two industries. Remember, I said it's a fundamental reboot of the entire operating system of how the world operates. Another example, Goldman Sachs, one of the big banks, they used to have hundreds and hundreds of people sitting behind screens buying and selling shares on behalf of their customers. They had 600 traders in 2000. Today they have 2. They've all been replaced by computer systems. But the good news is there are new jobs created. There are 200 computer engineers who've had to support these systems. So yes, we are going to lose many jobs, but we're going to create many, many new jobs, jobs we haven't even thought about yet. If there are any lawyers in the room, here's a fascinating story. JP Morgan, another one of the big banks, in 2016, they paid lawyers for 360,000 hours of contract work. Now, lawyers charge a lot of money by the hour, thousands of dollars an hour. They've now written software that does in a few seconds what took lawyers 360,000 years to do. So it's not just factory workers, it's not just taxi drivers who are going to be impacted by this digital revolution. It is everybody, no matter what level of employment you're at. And that's one of the realities we need to teach our kids about. And we're seeing crazy, crazy business impacts. We're sitting here on something called Zoom, a piece of free technology that we're using to talk to each other. Zoom's market capitalization has grown to nearly $50 billion. To put that in perspective, that is nearly twice the value of Anglo-American. It is more than the top 7 airlines in the world combined. This is how a digital business, which doesn't require factories, doesn't require hundreds and thousands of workers, this is how a digital business can become incredibly powerful in this changing world of ours. And in fact, if you go to China, I just love this slide. In China, the beggars, when they come to you, they don't ask you for money. They hold up that QR code and they say, scan me. And you simply scan them with your cell phone and say, I'm going to give you 2 Rand, 5 Rand, 10 Rand, whatever it might be. And it's a digital exchange of money. They don't actually ask for cash. They simply say, scan me. Digitization is affecting absolutely everything. It's even impacting our religions. The Church of England, in the old days, you used to put money in a plate at church. Remember, they'd pass around the wooden plate and you would put money into it. No more. Now you just swipe your credit card across the digital plate. And if you happen to be Catholic, here's an interesting idea. You can now confess your sins online. There's a Roman Catholic app called Confession. You can go online, confess what you've done, and it will tell you how to atone for your sins. This is how deeply digitization is driving itself into the heart of our society.
Will you call me?
How long do you think before this happens? Sorry, let me go back to that one.
Will you call me?
Sorry?
Will you call me?
You mean telephone? Yeah?
Yes.
Where?
Now.
Because this is right here.
This is why I wanted to have lunch. You just find me? Now. Hello, Bethany speaking.
Hello?
You phoning for Bethany?
Yes. What are you doing?
This is Bethany. Can you hear me?
Well, you're right in front of me.
But can you hear me down the phone?
Oh, my God.
This is me. On the phone, I had it implanted. My hand is the phone.
Isn't that an incredible concept? That is from a futuristic movie that's been done in Britain. But how many of your children, ask the children that you teach, how many of them would like to have a digital chip implanted in their bodies that turns their hand into the phone? I guarantee you 90% of the children will say, fantastic. My generation says, oh, that's terrible. I don't want to be turned into a cyborg. The kids think quite differently. And that idea, I am the telephone, I have integrated, is very much the way young people in the world are thinking. Now, you know, we might think that young people are getting many things wrong, and certainly they don't have all the answers. But I thought this poster was so powerful. You know, it's time for change when children act like leaders and leaders act like children. When I look around the world, I see so many leaders acting like bad-mannered children, and I see young people stepping forward and saying, we have to change the world, we have to do things differently. It's this next generation of young people upon whom we have to depend to create the society that we want. And the challenge is for you as educators to shape these young people to think correctly. So here are the key lessons I want to conclude with. Number one, please understand that your feet are already on fire. You might not be feeling the flames right now, but education and every other field of human activity is going through dramatic change. The starting point is to recognize that the world is changing and to move forward. The second point is to look at this picture. I absolutely adore this picture. This is how so many of us run our businesses. We look backwards at last year. We want to do last year, we want to improve by 5% or whatever. Instead of turning around and saying there's an opportunity or a threat right there at our feet, face the opportunity, face the future, ask the right questions, and look in the right direction. You cannot run your enterprise, you cannot run your school by looking backwards. You need to look forwards into the future. And critically, in these times, we need to look beyond COVID. Yes, it's consuming us right now. Yes, we have to focus on the issue right now. But what happens in a year's time when COVID is past us? We need to think about that. So, lesson number 3, back to basics. And of course, it's reading, writing, arithmetic. You know the numbers better than me. The appalling statistics that come out of South Africa in terms of people at school who are not able to read, people at school who do not understand basic arithmetic. We've got to go back to that. But we also need to teach human skills. And these are some of the human skills. Common sense, the most uncommon skill of all. Mystery, emotion, serendipity, storytelling. How do we teach our children their history, their religion, their culture? We do it through storytelling. What are you doing at the schools that you're at to make sure that storytelling is part of it? Relationships, creativity, design, humor, fun. These are essential human characteristics that computers cannot do. These are the things we need to be teaching children in addition to the technical skills. And there's something called HECI. I'm sure you've all heard of STEM. We say that STEM is critically important in education, science, technology, education, and mathematics. But increasingly, we're being said, in addition to STEM, we need to learn about HECI. Now, what is HECI? It stands for humanity, ethics, compassion, creativity, and imagination. Now, you think of our society, you think of the corruption that exists in our society, you think of the poor ethics in business and in government, and the lack of humanity that we're seeing at the moment as people get dragged out of their shacks and all sorts of things. You have to make sure that the children you educate are educated in these things as well as in the formal skills. And then facing reality. We have to embrace this as a reset opportunity. And I came across this slide from Dr. Nick Spall. I'm sure many of you have heard of him, probably one of the most powerful educators from the University of Stellenbosch. And the point he makes is that in the years from 1995 to 2000, in terms of gains in learning outcome, it was a flat period. Then we grew. We improved education dramatically between the years of 2003 and 2011. But now we've entered a period of flattening. Now we've entered a period of stalling. The opportunity for us is to say, how do we get back to that growth factor and improve the standards of education? The next thing is we have to embrace technology. Yes, technology is forever. Yes, technology is an integral part of learning, but blended. The human touch cannot be underestimated. This is the reality. The black line at the bottom is South Africa. This is the access that people have to computers in high school. And as you can see, since 2011, it's gone down, 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 down. That's really, really bad news. We have to educate people in technology, but we have to blend that with the teacher in the class, the human skill as well. Now let me get controversial. What happens in the months ahead when schools start again? I'm afraid we're going to have to forget the curriculum to a large extent. Now, that's a difficult thing to say, but it's going to be virtually impossible for kids to catch up with the curriculum with all the disruption that they've had. And I believe we have to focus instead on re-socializing the children. They have been out of touch with each other. They've been living under bizarre circumstances. We have to bring them back into that human concept. And then critically, we have to bring the parents into a partnership. I've spoken to a number of educators, and they tell me that there's very often conflict between parent and educators. Teachers tend to regard parents as being unprofessional. They don't know anything about it. Parents very often don't have the time or the capacity or the technology, for that matter, to get engaged in their school, in their child's learning. It's an opportunity for us to say, how do we build a partnership between educators and parents in order to drive education forward? Because these are the skills of the 21st century: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. Those are the core skills we have to teach. So I want to close with this slide. And again, this is thanks to Dr. Nick Spall. Effectively, you have to prepare students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't yet been invented to solve problems we don't yet know are problems. That's the reality. And how can you possibly embrace that challenge unless you spend a fair amount of your time not managing the present, but thinking about how do you create the future? Clifford, that's me. Thank you very, very much for listening to me. I hope that's provided some insight. and I would be happy to answer some questions if there are any. I've got a minute or two to go still. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm back. If anybody has a question, quickly.